Join us, the Humanitarian Heartbeat Podcast, on a journey where we delve into the heart of the matters that truly make a difference. Our mission is to create a platform where we can openly discuss topics that often go unnoticed or unexplored. We aim to shed light on these crucial issues and have meaningful conversations. We invite you to tune into our podcast, where we will explore the depths of these subjects and let our hearts guide the conversation. Together, we can create a space where everyone's voice is heard and where we can collectively work towards a better future. Welcome, everyone, to the Humanitarian Heartbeat Podcast. I am your host, Nia Imani, and I have the distinct pleasure of interviewing my dad, but you know him as Curry Bailey. Thank you for joining us, Daddy.
My pleasure. I'm excited.
Everybody, I'm going to read his bio, which I probably should already know by heart, but it's going to be a professional bio. And then we'll get right into the questions. So my dad, Curry Bailey, serves as a valued board member of the Bird Cancer Education and Advocacy Foundation, a steadfast resident of Philadelphia. He takes immense pride in his role as a loving father to myself and Jared, and a grandfather to Jay's children, Quinn and Jade. Curry finds joy in witnessing their growth and flourishing. While Curry is currently a free agent, he boasts an extensive professional background across diverse fields. His prior endeavors include vocational rehabilitation, where he dedicated himself to assisting individuals in overcoming obstacles and finding meaningful employment. Additionally, he has actively contributed to social services, working tirelessly to support and uplift marginalized communities. Driven by a commitment to fostering safe and nourishing environments for young minds, Curry has also been involved in school safety and student discipline. Through his dedicated efforts, he aimed to create atmospheres conducive to learning, ensuring that students could thrive both academically and personally. That's pretty good.
And that was about me? Oh, okay.
So first, tell the people, where are you from?
Where am I from? I'm, West Philly.
West Philly. And particularly, where in West Philly? What is that part of West Philadelphia called?
Well, I know there's been some reconfiguration of the landscape of Philadelphia, but when I was coming up, it was considered the Mill Creek section of the area.
Okay. And do some people call that the bottom?
Yeah, but to me, that's kind of a stretch. If you were to call it the bottom, it really would be the top of the bottom.
Okay.
Because when I was growing up, the way we kind of viewed the bottom was, I guess, 32nd Street to 40th, Girard to Market. So that was really what was considered the bottom.
Okay.
But I don't look at it as a disparaging statement. So if somebody says it, I don't correct it, because we're all part of the same family anyway.
That's true. The reason why I said it like that, because I guess the way that it's considered now as the bottom, it's not maybe the best place to live. Do you disagree? Do you agree?
I just think they stretch the boundaries. I don't think it's a matter of whether or not it's a good place or a not place, because if you drive through the area, you see there's been a lot of renovations that have taken place, in the area. So it doesn't appear to be a rundown area to me. So that might very well be people's perception of it, why they came up with that. But I would vehemently disagree with that assessment.
Okay. That makes sense, because I'm going somewhere with this in that, so you came from the bottom, quote unquote, and then went to West Philadelphia, right? High school? That's where you attended?
Yes.
Okay. And then you went to Penn State. I mean, is that a huge leap, or is that just what happens in Philadelphia. You come from the quote unquote bottom, you go to a neighborhood school, and then you go to a great college. Is that
Well,
an
I guess
anomaly?
I guess no, only because schools didn't have the same reputation back then that they have now. So where I lived at, I should have went to Overbrook, but I made the motivation program. So at that time, Overbrook didn't have a motivation program.
Okay.
That's why I ended up at West Philly High School. And the motivation program was primarily for people that had the aptitude to go to college. So, in response to your question, it wouldn't be considered an anomaly because if I'm in the motivation program, then I'm on a college track. So for me to end up going to college from high school is a natural progression.
Mm, that makes sense. That makes sense. So you always knew that you wanted to go to college?
It was preordained because my father worked for Temple University and my mother was a very diehard person in regards to education. So there wasn't a thought to consider doing anything else. I don't even know if I could have approached them with doing anything else. It would have probably been like I was speaking another language.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So how was it coming from Philadelphia to Penn State? Was that a big culture shock? Did you have any difficulty in education, or it was a breeze and no culture shock at all?
Well, yes, it was a culture shock because you figure in my Philadelphia school education, it was 99 and 44, 100% Black.
Okay.
To the best of my recollection, I only went to school with two people that were identified as something other than Black. There was one young man, his father was a professor at Penn, Paul Marshall. He was a Caucasian.
Okay.
Then when I got to high school, there was a Korean young lady in my class named Carol Lee. Other than that, everybody else was BLACK. So to go from that to Penn State, which you could argue was maybe 95% white, it was an adjustment, but it wasn't that I was in fear or intimidated by it. It's just that they, I think, had to adjust more to us than we had to adjust with you because Black people by large have a history of being able to make adjustments.
Mm, that's an interesting statement. How did they have to adjust to uh, the Black presence on campus? How did?
Well, as it related to their biases, they had to keep them to themselves. They weren't going to be able to maybe say certain things or infer or imply certain things around us without us commenting on it. And some of it they did was out of ignorance, and some of it they did was out of hatred.
Mhm.
So the ignorance part, you saw a progression of improvement. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, but just the fact that for a lot of them, they had never encountered a Black person before, other than what they saw on TV.
Mm,
So their image of a Black person was watching the Jeffersons of Good Times or something like that.
that's interesting. So did they feel like you weren't necessarily Black because you may have not fit the image of the Jeffersons and of Good Times? Did they think you were an anomaly of Blackness?
Yeah, for some people, yeah, definitely. They thought we were an anomaly. Like, ah, you don't smoke, you don't drink, you don't do drugs, and you use the King's English. Wow.
Mm,
Are you sure you're really Black? So yeah, you did get some of that in a way too. And I think the way we adjusted to it was as the way Black people commonly adjust to things, finding the humor in it.
mm, mhm, mhm. What did you study at Penn State?
Uh, I majored in the social sciences, and the social science I mostly delved in was psychology.
Why was that important for you? Why did you want to study in that?
Well, little quick story. I originally went to college majoring in economics. And that was because of my mother and my father, because they were both entrepreneurs. They were both business people.
Mm-hmm.
There was a record store in Center City called Zounds. It was a 3-story record store. And I went there one day and they kept playing this record over and over again. You could probably find it on YouTube. Engine Number 9 by
Mm-hmm.
Wilson Pickett. They must have played it the whole 2 hours I was in the store. I do my shop and I get home. I have a record in my bag. What record do I have in my bag? Come on, tell me what record I have in my bag.
Engine number 9.
Yeah, and I couldn't figure out for the life of me why I bought it. And that made me start doing some research in what the mind is responsible for. It's
Mm-hmm.
responsible for behavior. And that made me shift my directory to want to more go into the social sciences, particularly psychology, and influences of the mind and how it affects what we do.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's why I ended up, delving into it.
Wow. Did that also help you understand why there were some biases that happened while you were at Penn State? Did that help you understand their way of thinking?
I think it more so let me understand my way of thinking versus theirs.
Mm.
I kind of looked at theirs and just kind of deep rooted in decades and centuries of indoctrination,
Mm.
by their parents, just by society at large, about us being inferior beings and needing to be subservient to anything that they wanted. So I think it more so benefited how I viewed my people versus, what they were trying to espouse.
That's deep. So what did you do after that? So you now have your degree in psychology. What did you do after? Where did you get a job? What was your goal?
Well, I guess let's stay in my college years first before I
Uh-huh.
move on.
Uh-huh.
I did an internship at Camp Hill Correctional Institution. That was at that time mostly a prison for juveniles.
Okay.
And I worked in their program for inmates that were identified as having substance abuse problems.
Okay.
So there were individuals that got committed for committing a crime but had a drug and alcohol problem. Because the feeling with working with that is they were going to keep being repeat offenders, returning to prison until you address their drug and alcohol abuse problem.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I did my first work, specifically my degree.
Okay.
I also, for a period of time, worked at, and you know this place, a restaurant in Ardmore, the IHOP. And I worked there on the weekends, busting suds. Now, you might look at that and say, wow, what does that have to do with psychology?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I had to work with people, I had to learn how to get along with people. And that was kind of interesting because some people looked at me and said, you're a college boy. What you doing working in here? Now I realize that even college boys need to get an education. So in terms of being able to work along and collaborate with people, that's where my education helped me at also.
Mm-hmm.
But also the primary job that I had up until that point was working in my mother's grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working in the neighborhood essentially that I grew up in. And I'm dealing with biases that people had with us working in a grocery store because you had the stories and the rumors going around that we didn't own a grocery store. A white man owned the grocery store and we worked for this white man. So it just gave me a sense of people's biases towards us and not really taking it personally, but just trying to look at it from where they were coming from.
Hmm. Wow. How was it working with the juveniles who experienced those things? Was that hard for you? Were you empathetic to what they were going through?
Well, interestingly enough, at the time I worked at Camp Hill, it was going through a transition. So it wasn't all juvenile.
Okay.
There were some adults in there too. But to answer your question, interestingly enough, a lot of the people that were at Camp Hill from Philadelphia,
Okay.
a lot of the people that were at Camp Hill was from my neighborhood.
Oh, wow.
So I could walk through the yard, and like my nickname is Skeet. So I could walk through the prison yard. Yo, Skeet, what's up? How you doing, man? What you doing here? What you down for? Because initially they thought I had committed a crime. I ended up in there. But then when I told them why I was there, they said, that's decent, man. It's decent. You're going to help the brothers out? I
Mm,
said, yeah, I'm going to do the best I can. So it was interesting because there were some people I saw there. There was no surprise to see them there.
mhm,
But then you had that other group of people. I was really like scratching my head. Hey, what are you doing here? What did you do? What did you do? And then when they would tell me the reason why they were there, wrong place, wrong time,
mm,
wrong people, wrong time. That story your parents were always telling you, birds of a feather flock together. You're judged by the company you keep. So many times that was the story of what ended up being the reason why people ended up there. So I don't know if I tried to empathize with them. I tried to point out to them that they did have options, they did have alternatives, and to try to consider that so that when they got released, they didn't end up back there again.
and then that speaks to how did you feel that you come from the same place, you look the same in as far as your blackness, but you are on one side and they're on the other side. Did you have some survivor's guilt?
Not at all. And I think that was because of my mother and my father.
Okay.
Because for that time, I might want to consider stepping out of my lane. I could just hear their voices now. Have you lost your natural mind?
Yeah. Mhm,
What were you thinking? What were you doing? You weren't raised like that.
mhm,
No, look at me. Look at your father. Look at your mother. Look at your family. You come from better stock than that. Why would I couldn't come up with a reason when I think, even if I sit here and think about some of the things that they got convicted of,
mhm.
I couldn't come up with an insane reason enough to do it.
Okay.
You know, he was going out with my girl, so that's why we broke into his house. Wow. And that's going to make them feel bad. How?
Right.
I just couldn't. And it's not that I spent a lot of time trying to think of a reason to do so,
Right.
but it never did. And the people that I hung out with weren't like that either. We didn't have those conversations. We
Mm,
were talking about the 76ers, the Eagles, where we are going to go Saturday night, what school was going to be like when we go back. The people that I hung up with didn't entertain those conversations. So it wasn't difficult to stay out of that type of activity.
mm. And then I think you also speak to um, the importance, if there's an importance, and you can speak to this, to having a two-parent household. Do you think that's important? Part one. And part two, the the men who were in that predicament, did they come from two-parent households?
I think it was split down the middle 50-50.
Okay.
So to answer your first question, I think it's a lot easier to be a parent for the parent in a two household uh, house.
Mhm.
So for that other parent, it's going to be easier for them, I think.
Okay.
But great people, I mean, your mother's a prime example of that, come from single parent households, just a matter of people being able to kind of make that adjustment. But when I sit here now, I'm thinking about some of the people I know that did eventually end up getting incarcerated. It's probably a 50-50 split.
Okay.
Yeah, it's probably half two parent households, one parent household.
Okay.
Or even in the terms of having one parent households, them tag teaming a child. So it might be a one parent household, but you might have a grandparent that's involved. You might have an aunt that's involved. You might have an uncle that's involved. You might have an older sibling that's involved. So it's kind of like they say it takes a village to raise a child. So there probably was really no true one parent household. There's probably one parent in conjunction with the village to
Mm,
help raise the child.
that's a good point. And then I think you also speak to the conversations that were had. You said the conversations you had wasn't was of substance. Can you speak to that too?
Sure. I think that just using my parents for an example is the best one I could use. There was a lot of pride in the way that they were brought up. There was a lot of pride in the values that were instilled in them. So even though they really had a tough time of it, they didn't wear it. They
Mm,
didn't talk about that part. They talked about the achievement. They talked about the triumph. They talked about the success that they had, growing up. So my father would kind of talk about them being so poor, they thought fatback was white ham. That's how they just kind of viewed it. But that was not an excuse to do anything that was destructive or counterproductive. You had two hands, you had a mind. Just put those two hands and that mind to work, and you'll be able to achieve and accomplish what you want. In the case of my mother, she was a nurse. She said if she had been able to, she would have been a doctor. No ifs, ands, and buts about it. She had the qualification and capability to do it. But being a nurse was satisfactory to her, and she was satisfied with that.
mhm,
But I didn't hear any despair and regret ever coming from them. I
mhm,
always saw the positive and the bright side to what life was like. And that's how I took it in terms of being a Black person. There's more positives of that than there is negatives of being that.
mhm. Wow. So, how did you take that positivity to after your bachelor's? What did you do after that? What was your job?
Well, at first I worked in my mother's grocery store,
Mhm,
and I did that going way back. I started in there when I was 10 years old, when I was just about tall enough to look over the counter.
mhm,
And eventually got to a point where I could, run the whole operation. I could open it up, run it for a whole day, and close it up. So I did that until it was decided that she would close the store. But the year before she closed the store, I worked as a counselor in a group home. So that was like really the really first big job I had where I'd be able to use my degree.
okay.
So I was working with young people that were placed there through DHS. And I was also working with young people that had been placed there because it was runaways.
Mhm,
And that gave me an opportunity to assist them in making better decisions in their life because it wasn't anything that they had done wrong per se
mhm,
that they ended up in the group home. But it's like, what were they going to do as a result of being in that group home to counter the stigma of that?
right,
To counter the fact that they may have been abused, misused, and mistreated.
mhm.
How could they turn that into a positive and not dwell on the negative side of that? That was the first job that I had directly related to my degree.
Were you able to help them see the positive and uh, come out of the group home?
I think in most cases I was. And what we really tried to do in the group home is to replicate a positive living arrangement. So the group home had a membership to the YMCA. So it was able to take them there and go swimming. The group home was on a huge property. So in the wintertime, we could take them on the sled down a hill.
Mhm,
We could also take them to a basketball court we had to play basketball. Just trying to replicate activities in a child's life that some of them have been missing out on.
mhm,
And even in terms of dealing with their outbursts and their anger when we responded to them. We didn't respond to them obviously by hitting them. What seems to be the problem? Can you share it with me? Are you willing to share it with me? Can we think alternative behaviors to acting out? And some of them will act self-destructive, so they might take their fist and punch it through a window. Well, now they split the arm open, got to rush into the hospital, using that time as an opportunity to have them say, "Do you think this was a good idea?" And then
Mm-hmm.
there were 12 stitches in your arm. What you have done? What could you have done differently? Yes, I understand you're angry. Yes, I understand you're upset. Can you come up with alternative ways of dealing with that anger? Doesn't end up making you angrier and ends up being counterproductive.
Yeah,
So, yeah, I think that we were able to do some good, do some very good, do some very good, do and some very good with the young people that we work with there.
that's awesome. That's awesome. And can you also talk to us about your time at Moss Rehab? Talk to us about that and what you did and who were your clients?
Okay, so at Moss Rehab, I worked in the Drucker Brain Injury Center. And at that time, we were on the cutting edge of a brand new field. And the brand new field would be vocational rehabilitation for people with traumatic brain injury. The success rate of those people returning to work wasn't very high back then. So through our program, which was a grant funded program, we were able to show that with the proper supports, people with brain injury could return to work successfully. So we had people that returned to their previous employment. We had people that returned to new jobs. And the range of occupations that they had went from being janitors, went from being cooks,
Mm-hmm.
went from being salesmen, went from being lawyers, went from being social workers. It just ran the gamut. It was just a matter of getting the proper match
Mm-hmm.
and also using a different strategy and returning to work. Because in the past, what they would do, they would place you in a job and then they would train you. Excuse me, they would train you first and
Uh-huh.
then put you in a job.
Uh-huh.
What we did, we put you in a job first and then trained you. We found it to be more effective because we could take in consideration the variations in that specific job that you were in that we might not have considered if we trained you in a job before we actually put you in it.
That makes
So
sense.
yeah, I would say that we had a fairly high success rate in doing that and being able to look back years later and them being in the same position that they were in that we placed them in when they came to our center for rehabilitation.
That's amazing. So both times you essentially work with the mind.
Uh, yeah, I would say so. Even in terms of with the people that had traumatic brain injury, helping them adjust to the new you,
Mm,
to the new them. Because some of them was maybe used to doing things a certain way previously. And it could be anything as simple as preparing to go to work in the morning.
mm,
Well, before your injury, it didn't take you as long. So you could just literally hop out the bed and get out and go to work. Excuse me. Now when you do that, you end up being late. You end up being late often enough, you're going to end up getting fired. So getting them to adjust to that new reality, that certain procedures you had to use every morning to get yourself successful to go to work. And even at the end of your work day,
mm,
there may have been things that you did before your injury that you could no longer do after your injury. And one of the big things for people with brain injury was drinking.
mm.
The brain became more sensitive to the effects of alcohol after an injury. So some of them, and some were not successful doing this, but the ones that we work with only well we were, because they got counseling regarding it, that, you're going to have to give the alcohol up at this point,
Mm.
not going to be able to drink anymore.
Completely.
Completely, and some still dibbled and dabbled, and I mean, they just had to accept the risk with that if they're willing to do that. But I would say for the most part, most of them were able to reduce it drastically or stop altogether.
That's awesome. That is awesome. And then from there, what did you get your degree in at Temple University?
Well, it's interesting because I got my degree in special education, but why I started in that was because of the job I had before Moss, and that was working at Temple University's Woodhaven Center.
Mm,
That's where I met your mother.
okay.
And while I was working at Temple University's Woodhaven Center, they had a program where employees could take classes. And one of the classes they offered was on the grounds that we worked on. So that was like a no-brainer to me. Temple's going to pay for me to go to school. They're going to offer the classes right here where I work. So literally, at the end of my work shift, I could take 1,000 giant steps and I'd be in class.
Mm-hmm.
And I was interested in special education anyway. So I first started my program while I was at Temple University's Woodhaven Center. And obviously, once I left there to work at the Drucker Center, I just continued with my education to stay. And it merged with it well because I was working with people that were intellectually, developmentally disabled at Woodhaven. And then when I was working at Moss, I was working with people that had brain injury.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a chance to apply what I was learning to my vocation.
That makes sense. Why were you particularly interested in special education?
I had a friend growing up who had a brain injury, and I knew that once I got older. And just the challenges, some of the challenges he had to go through having that brain injury. And he did very well in his life. He went to a school specialized for people with disabilities. And then when I thought back to other people that had various type of situations that made out well, that wouldn't have made out well had they not had the right training, support, and education and information. So it was something that always interests me. But working at Woodhaven and seeing what we were able to accomplish there, because the unit that I worked on at Woodhaven was Buttonwood, and Buttonwood had the clients that had behavior challenges. So not only were you working with their intellectual shortcomings, you also work with the behavioral shortcomings.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they could end up with you having to do restraints. So being able to do the training with them, the goal was to reduce the number of restraints or even reduce the need to do restraints at all. Because if you were able to do that, then they could eventually end up living in the community
Mm-hmm.
because their behavior was more manageable.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. That makes sense. And by having children and also working in the environments of like brain injury and how um, the clients sustain their brain injuries, that changed your outlook on how you were going to raise your children. Like, for example, um, if Jay and I rode a bike, we were going to wear a helmet, like things like that. That change your outlook on how you're going to raise us and sustain us?
I think it accentuated it. I don't know if it necessarily changed it, because I always consider myself as related to my children, very interested in their well-being. But you obviously were in some of the rooms and conversations took place, and so who would know better than you? But I think where it kind of came to a head is when Jared wanted to play football. And I just didn't see that being a worthwhile endeavor. But there were other things that he could do where he could put into practice his athletic talents.
Mhm.
I think that was the more glaring example of how that affected me because it could change your life forever without chance of correction. And I think even now, Jared would agree that it was the right decision. I mean, he's even said it on occasions, uh, given, and I could understand why he wanted to play football because he's an extremely talented, individual. But going off your question that you asked, it's an interesting question. But I guess if it did nothing else, it just got me to value how precious the brain is.
Mm,
That there's many transplants from many other parts of our body. Haven't found one for that yet.
right,
That just shows you the intricacies of the brain and how we need to value it and why we need to treasure it and do everything we can to preserve it.
right, right.
But yeah, probably it's probably other ways that it affected me too that I'm not able to think of at this moment. But I look at how people had to just really galvanize themselves after a traumatic brain injury in a lot of cases, and how they really longed for their former self that they were no longer going to be able to capture. But yet, with the advances that have been made in science and with education being the way that it is, you can make drastic improvements with a person that had a brain injury if they are given the proper supports.
Right. That makes sense. That makes sense. And then also staying on raising children and I guess sort of the mind too, in your experience of back to Penn State and understanding your worth, being in a place where it's 95% white, did that impact the way that you were going to raise Jay and I and how we saw ourselves in the world? Um, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that just to have belief in yourself, have pride in yourself, and show you the reasons why. I mean, it's one thing to tell you that you should, but I think being able to point out examples of that and your parents and your grandparents and your family being able to do that, as well. And just being mindful of as impactful as the decisions that I made on my life were on me, your decisions are going to be even that much more impactful on you and your brother.
Mm,
And being able to take that into consideration, you know, to the things that you were exposed to the things that you're going to be involved in. Golly, you're really making me think about this. But yes, I mean, even in terms of the things that the two of you showed, interest in, when Jared got to be older and getting to be training in a lifeguard. I mean, it made sense to me for him to do that because he was interested in the sports, interested in the sports field, and that lifeguard is a skill that can take you the rest of your life.
mhm,
And then with you having kind of a split interest in civil rights and medicine, doing internships at places that gave you exposure to both of those.
mhm,
So when you did the internship at Pillcop, it was just too boring to you. You said, this is not for me. I don't want to do that. But when you did the internship at Hill, helping the elderly at Lankenau, that was a whole different vibe. You really took ownership with that. You really enjoyed, taking care of those people. So just being mindful of the importance of guiding or steering your children in a direction that gives them exposure to things that they might be interested in, and then they can decide conclusively whether or not they want to or not, and then make the decision off of information instead of trying to guess.
mhm, mhm. And then also too on sort of being in love with our blackness, was that important to you as well? I remember getting dolls that had my skin complexion, or the things that we read, or making sure that we knew our history. And, was that very important to you as well?
Absolutely. Because I think that part of the reason why some of us as a people are lost now is we don't know any of that. We don't know the why. So when we think of being black, we think of rapping, and that's it. And I'm saying, man, I mean, some people made tens of millions of dollars doing that, but there's so much more to the richness of black people than that. There was a group called the Last Poets, and they were like Gil Scott Heron. They made that type of inspirational music. Black is the velvet of the midnight sky. Black is so beautiful it could make you cry. Black is short, black is tall. Let me impress to you that black is all. But one thing I've come to find, most of all, black is mind. I mean, that's how I wanted you and your brother to be able to appreciate black, that it's so beautiful, so spiritual, so dynamic, so impactful, that every time you come across it, your chest swells up with pride because of the richness of it.
Mhm.
And I think that's why some of the movies that I've seen that make that point have really resonated with me.
Mhm.
And I think the one that's most impactful out of all the movies I've ever seen is Hidden Figures.
Mm.
I mean, every time I see a clip of it, every time I see a portion of it, it's like, yeah, we were doing that kind of stuff and everything was stacked against us. Not to say that things aren't stacked against us now, but they weren't as dire as they was back then. Let's take pride in that. Let's take satisfaction in that. Let's take
Mhm.
a deep breath and just think of and realize that there's so much more that we have that we don't have. Let's focus on our resources and not our deficit. So that was, what I wanted to, and not just me, our family, your mother, your grandparents, everybody wanted to impress upon you that, yeah, black is mine.
That's powerful. That's powerful. And how did you take the pride of culture, the pride of blackness, the your educational background, your psychology background? How did you take that into the school district and uh, being all the different roles that you had? How did you take that and make it work for the youth?
Well, first and foremost, for me not to look, for me not to be, for me not to behave as a contradiction. That I was in part everything that I was saying that you should be.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of my language, I'm not calling you names. I'm not cussing at you. I'm not threatening you. I'm not raising my voice if I don't have to. In terms of how I address them, young man, young lady, young king, young queen. In terms of if they had a situation that they were dealing with, that there are alternative ways, there are groups, there are teams, there are villages out there that can help you. So just to break it into the specificity of the job, my first job with the school district was post-secondary readiness coordinator. And basically what that was looking at preparing children for life after 12th grade. So what I was actually able to do in that position, I brought a group of young ladies to Girls High. Girls High is a special admissions high school. And at that time, Girls High was the only girls' school in the country that had a robotics program. So I got the girls from Girls High to put on a special program from these girls from Fulton Elementary School and how a piece of paper could be transformed into the idea of a robot. So them being able to see girls that look like them, being able to see girls that had higher aspirations was one of the things in that position that I tried to do to show them there was another side of life. When I was a school safety program officer, what I did was training students in conflict resolution, peer mediation, getting them to see that there were alternative ways of dealing with conflict other than fighting. So I did trainings in schools with children doing that, but I also conducted training, I also conducted mediations myself for young people that had disputes. In regards to a position as a hearing officer, being able to conduct hearings with young people that had maybe chosen the wrong pathway to dealing with disputes and being able to hash out in the hearing what exactly did happen. Could they have dealt with it differently? What would they do next time? And being able to come up with alternatives to maybe removing them from the school when in fact they could stay in the school with supports in place to help them deal with the situation if it comes up again. Mm-hmm. So that's really the three examples for the three positions I had in the school district.
They're great examples. And I would say in each example, you are on the side of the student. You want to see them successful and you're invested in not only them while they're in school, but what's going on at home and how can we help so that you're successful 360.
I would agree, and I would think that some people look at that as a negative. That I'm taking the side of the student over the school, and I'm taking in the best interest, and I can't give them all the ins and outs of my thinking, but I'm taking everything into consideration because it wasn't always the best interest of the child to leave them at the school. Sometimes the feelings were so harsh, the repairers could not be repaired. Excuse me, the insult could not be repaired, so they had to move on to another school, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Because sometimes a fresh start, a new start, was helpful for everybody involved. But yeah, considering being child-centered, I mean, I have children of my own, so I always looked at that as well. As if it was my child, how would I want them to be treated? I would want them to be treated fairly. You know, for some children, in regards to my position as a hearing officer, as well as sometimes the families, didn't think the schools were treating them with justice. So sometimes, for the first time, the family felt they were being heard. And sometimes that was enough for the schools to hear to be willing to give a child another chance. So it's really an opportunity to develop better communication. Hopefully that school could hear that and do better going forward. And the family could do better hearing that going forward.
So you really implemented advocacy, that you advocated for both roles, but allowing, like you said, the student and the family to have a voice.
Yes, that's correct.
Mm-hmm. And so you also carry that into the Bird Cancer Foundation. Why is that foundation or and the role of a board member important to you?
Well, I guess I can excuse me, answer that twofold. Primarily, it's important to me because it's important to you. Because you're a very passionate advocate for people dealing with cancer. And your ideals, your thoughts, your vision, I'm totally in line with. And you've recruited people that are similarly aligned with your vision. And the thoughts, the ideals, the goals that you have in mind, I'm in sync with. And I can honestly tell you that you have really opened my eyes to the necessity of that. Not that I didn't think it was important anyway, but you know that what drew me into this was the fact that I had cancer myself.
Mm-hmm.
And that if you left it up to me, I would have left it there and that would be the end of it. But you wouldn't allow me to do that. And that's quite all right because I've seen the benefit of my involvement with Bird, being able to be a support system by being a more board member with the Bird Foundation has and will accomplish. So yeah, I mean, it all really comes together for the good. What you've been able to do, bringing the board foundation together.
What we've been able to do, but it seems like your life has been and will continue to be that of advocacy, of resilience, respect, um, and really amplifying those who aren't necessarily seen. Um, do you think that's sort of, or to add on your purpose in life?
No, I think you said it as well as I could say it. Yeah, because excuse me, the themes excuse me, the themes to Bird are also some of the themes that I've dealt with in my life. You know, when I think back to the most recent extravaganza that the Bird Foundation had, and some of the information that's come out as a result of the impact that it had. Yeah, that's all in sync. Information, education, advocacy, support, empathy, encouragement. I mean, you look at all of that and it embodies that. Being able to be the voice for the voices, being able to tie together, connect together people and individuals who may not have seen the connection previously. For the people that were in attendance, as well as the people that are members of the Board Foundation. I mean, it accomplished that for all of us. So, yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Out of your journey in life, and all the many hats that you wear as father, grandfather, educator, entrepreneur, et cetera, philanthropist, right? Um, who do you say that you are?
Wow. I'm a servant, you know, because in all those capacities I've been able to serve. So it's a question that I have given thought to time when I've done various endeavors in my life. Like, what's the purpose of this? Why am I doing it? And it's provided me an opportunity to serve.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, yeah, I would say that probably best sums up me saying who I am. I'm a servant.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And if anyone is listening and they're like, "Oh my goodness, I he has a robust knowledge of the psychology and education and just all the pillars that you have been a part of, and they would want you to speak to the schools or be a keynote speaker or whatever their ideas are, how are they able to get in touch with you? Via email?
Okay, so my email is Curry underscore 19151 at yahoo.com.
Thank you. Thank you. And is there anything else that you would like to share? Anything that is on your heart to share with the audience, with our listeners about just Curry J. Bailey from the bottom to here?
No, I think the questions that you pose really allowed me to cover the landscape. And if there's something that I miss, charge it to my head, not my heart.
You all have listened to my dad, but you can call him Curry J. Bailey the third, on the Humanitarian Heartbeat podcast. You heard him. I know you heard just, I mean, he briefly went through his beautiful trajectory and landscape of his life and career, but he would be a great asset to the schools and being a speaker. So please reach out to him. I'll make sure his email is posted everywhere. Thank you, Daddy, for being a guest today.
My pleasure.
And you have heard it on the Humanitarian Heartbeat podcast. We'll see you the next episode. Bye bye.
Thank you for joining us on the Humanitarian Heartbeat podcast. Remember, each conversation brings us closer to a world where compassion thrives. Stay connected, stay informed, and let's keep the heartbeat of humanity alive. Subscribe, share, and be a part of our journey to make a difference, one conversation at a time. Until next time, keep your hearts open, your minds curious, be a blessing to others, and give agape love. God bless.